When we picture the Industrial Revolution, we usually think of steam engines, smog, and factories in places like Manchester or London, right? But that's really only half the story. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just some local European event. It was a global tidal wave that completely rewired the entire planet's economy. So, let's pull on those threads and see where they lead.
And to really get our heads around this global network, we have to start with a seemingly simple question. How could one single factory, just churning out textiles in the middle of England, how could that completely upend the life of a farmer thousands of miles away in Egypt? Well, the answer comes down to the absolutely insatiable appetite of the new industrial machine. It was like a hungry beast that needed to be fed, and it looked to every corner of the globe for its food. But, before this machine could be fed, the world had to get a whole lot smaller. The very first step in this global rewiring was a massive revolution in transportation and communication. This created the arteries and the nerves for a brand new kind of colonial system. And what's just incredible is how fast these new technologies appeared, one right after the other. In just a few decades, you have steamships opening up huge rivers, railroads punching deep into continents, telegraph cables sending messages across the ocean in minutes instead of weeks, and then refrigerated ships that meant even food like meat could cross the globe. The world was shrinking, and it was shrinking fast.
But let's be really clear about these new railroads in the colonies. They weren't built for the local people, not at all. Their one and only purpose was to be a one-way street, an artery to funnel raw materials from deep in the interior out to the ports so they could be exported. And they were often built with the backbreaking, poorly paid labor of the very people whose resources were being carted away.
Steamships basically did the exact same thing for rivers. They could suddenly navigate these massive, previously untamable waterways like the Congo and the Ganges, opening up huge new territories for resource hunting. And when refrigeration came along in the 1870s, whoa! All of a sudden, you could ship beef from Argentina to a dinner table in London. Entirely new global markets were created almost overnight.
Now, if the railroads and steamships were the arteries, the telegraph was the nervous system. It was the brain. By laying these massive cables under the Atlantic, an order from an office in London could reach a colonial administrator in India or a business partner in Brazil almost instantly. This gave them a level of minute-by-minute control over their empires that was just completely unimaginable before. Okay, so the network is built. The connections are there. The next step was to completely transform the land itself. Farming across the colonies was totally repurposed. It shifted from the goal of feeding local people to the new goal of feeding distant factories. And this caused a huge shift on the ground. Just look at the difference here. Before, farming was all about subsistence, right? You grow a bunch of different crops to feed your family, your village. But under imperial rule, it became all about cash crops. The goal wasn't food security anymore. It was about producing massive amounts of a single profitable crop, like cotton or tea or rubber, all for export. And this had a direct and often brutal cost for the people living there. When all the best land is being used for exports, there's less land to grow actual food. So, naturally, local food prices shot up, leading to widespread hunger. You see this everywhere. Huge cattle ranches popping up in South America for the beef export market. While in Peru, people were forced into indentured labor just to mine bird droppings, guano, for fertilizer to boost farming back in Europe. Now, this whole transformation wasn't just about farming. It was a mad dash, a global scramble for all the specific raw materials that those industrial engines were screaming for. And this rush would go on to reshape entire nations.
Just take cotton. When the American Civil War started, Britain's main supply of cotton was suddenly cut off. The giant textile mills in Manchester started to panic. This created a massive vacuum, a huge global opportunity. Farmers all over the world were pushed to start growing cotton, but maybe nowhere saw a more dramatic change than Egypt.
And the result of that change? It's this one, single, jaw-dropping number. By the late 1800s, 93% of all of Egypt's export revenue came from one crop, cotton. Its entire economy was completely rewired to serve a single industry thousands of miles away.
Then there was rubber. After the invention of vulcanization, which made rubber super durable and useful, demand just exploded. Suddenly it was needed for everything: tires, gaskets, industrial belts. This new miracle material, which came from trees in places like the Amazon and the Congo, kicked off an absolute frenzy.
But this miracle came at a truly horrific human price. The so-called rubber barons who ran these operations made fortunes by enforcing brutal, impossible quotas on local workers. If you didn't deliver enough rubber, the punishment was often extreme violence. We're talking mutilation, or even death. This wasn't just extraction. It was extraction at its absolute cruelest.
And Africa really became a major focus of this resource rush. Palm oil was needed as a lubricant to literally grease the wheels of the revolution. Ivory was harvested from devastating elephant hunts to be carved into luxury goods like piano keys and billiard balls. But it was the search for treasures hidden deep in the earth that would create one of the most powerful monopolies of the entire era.
That treasure was diamonds, and the man who came to absolutely dominate the industry was Cecil Rhodes. Through his company, De Beers, in southern Africa, he ruthlessly took control of all the diamond mines, pushing local people off their land and building the foundations of a profoundly unequal society.
And the scale of his control was just staggering. By 1891, his company, De Beers, controlled 90%, that's 90% of the entire world's diamond production. This kind of insane concentration of wealth and power, built on the resources of colonized land, was one of the defining features of this whole period.
So, after all this rewiring, connecting, and extracting, what was the long-term result? Well, the consequences of this global system are absolutely still with us today, shaping the very world we live in. One of the most damaging legacies, especially for the environment, was the creation of monocultures. Basically, colonial powers would clear these incredibly diverse, resilient ecosystems to plant endless fields of just one cash crop. This wrecked the soil, destroyed biodiversity, and left entire regions incredibly vulnerable, both environmentally and economically. And the legacy is just profound. This system created economics that were totally dependent on exporting one or two cheap raw materials, and then they were forced to buy back expensive finished goods from those same imperial powers. It was a cycle that was almost impossible to break. It shattered traditional societies, created huge gaps between the rich and poor, and as we saw with Cecil Rhodes, it was built on racist policies that laid the groundwork for systems like apartheid that would last for generations.
So this entire global economic system, this division of the world into producers of raw materials and producers of manufactured goods, it was all designed and built nearly 200 years ago. And that leaves us with a really big question. How much of that original wiring is still plugged in today?